Well, we're now joined by geologist Professor Ian Plimer, live here in the studio. Ian, great to have you here as always. Tell me about that tie of yours. It's caught my eye and the viewers will want to know the full story. There, I've set you an opening here.
It's a Mar-a-Lago club tie. I've been to Mar-a-Lago a couple of times and I wear this tie on important occasions. Today's the exception,
Absolutely.
of course.
And you were most recently there for the inauguration?
I was in Washington for the inauguration. It started with a rally. It was a pretty cold night. And it was interesting to see the profile of the people. These were disenfranchised people. These were people who were suffering from the high electricity costs, from unemployment, from basically a deluded leader. And these people really are getting supported by a leader called Trump. And he's a phenomenon. We will not see the likes of another Trump again in our lives.
I agree.
An absolute phenomenon. And he does something which our politicians could learn from. He makes a promise and he actually sticks to it.
Yeah.
Now, that's really unusual. And we're all here waiting for our $275. That was a promise made to us. No one's got that money. So Trump is just bulldozing through policy, which people knew he was going to do. Now, at his rallies, these were incredible. Warmed up by people like Elon Musk, Megyn Kelly, who viewers would know as a regular on Paul Murray Live. It was absolutely phenomenal. And here's a man that can have the crowd eating out of his hand. And he does something very unusual. He speaks the truth. And people actually like that.
Now, he's promised, or he's already pulled out of the Paris Agreement. He's abandoned net zero. What can the coalition learn from Donald Trump, Ian?
Well, they can learn an enormous amount. The US, China, India, they're not in Paris. We once had the cheapest, most reliable energy systems in the world. We had coal giving us very cheap power in Victoria, a little bit more expensive in New South Wales and Queensland and Western Australia and South Australia, but we had cheap power. We have lost that because people have followed an ideological path. And this ideological path allegedly is underpinned by science. Now, if you follow the science, there is no science that demonstrates that human emissions drive global warming. So why are we doing it? So we're seeing countries like Germany and the UK go out backwards because they're following this renewables path. Trump has used something that's very, very rare. It's called common sense and is going down the path of saying, we have cheap coal, we have plenty of oil, not much uranium in the US, but they import it from Canada. And the US has only following the cheapest path for energy. That leads to a big manufacturing industry. We have no manufacturing industry now in this country because we've destroyed our energy system. So Mr. Dutton has to think very carefully about Paris. He actually has to think very carefully about the farms we are destroying with solar panels and wind turbines and power lines going across them. And James has had his hand up 4 times. Yes, the boy at the back.
Well, I'm going to ask you about this here because I want your opinion on, what should Peter Dutton then be saying? Because he has said in the past he's going to stick around in Paris because, we're in it, it is too hard to change or whatever. Yet, what I'm really interested in, I don't know geology, but I do know something about economics and business. BP has said we are retreating from net zero. Macquarie Bank and all of these banks around the world are all saying we are pulling back from net zero. We are going to invest in fossil projects again because that's where the money is. And if we don't have energy, we're not going to have economies. Why do you think the coalition seems to be trying to garner votes in these sort of inner city seats where they still care about Paris when it's out in the regions that people are saying, no, we've got to get out of this because it is destroying our communities, it's destroying our economy, it's destroying our future?
Well, Rita touched on it in her editorial. The Parliamentary Liberal Party has wets. They're in the Senate and they're in the lower house. And it's very hard for the leader sometimes to lead on matters of principle, which are going to be for the benefit of the country, when you've got wets who are in the wrong party. Mr. Dutton should lead. He should say, as a matter of principle, we want people to have cheap electricity in this country. We don't want these jaw-dropping electricity bills that people are getting because of renewables. We want to have energy supporting industry and creating jobs, and he has to lead. And if he doesn't want to lead, he can then say, well, we have the biggest economy in the world that's dropping net zero. We have growing economies like China and India that are not having net zero. China's building coal-fired power stations like they're going out of fashion. We need to rebuild coal-fired power stations. We need to have nuclear. We need to have a huge amount of baseload power with peak load coming from gas and from hydro. Now, we once had that system. Electricity was cheap. It isn't. And we're all paying, and some people are paying with their jobs. Some farmers are now losing their productive capability because they're getting these massive new power lines put over their properties to bring renewable energy from somewhere out in the donga into the cities, and they can't operate equipment underneath those power lines. So they've lost acreage and they've lost areas which produce food. This is an absolute travesty. A lot of the votes are in the areas around the edge of cities and in semi-rural areas. Mr Dutton should think callously and think, I want to chase the traditional Labor vote, and these people are being destroyed by Labor policies. Why should we have the Libs as a Labor light, which currently they are?
Well, we've seen that.
Rita's got a hand up.
We've seen that political realignment in the US. We've seen it in the UK. We've seen it in Australia. The Liberal Party seems to be the last bunch of people to know that there has been a switch. Those inner city affluent areas are going left, and the working middle class are increasingly going right. What about the argument they may put forward? Well, we don't need to leave Paris. We can still have these net zero targets because we'll get there via nuclear. What's your response to that?
Well, that argument is invalid because nuclear is going to take a long time. The second thing is you can leave Paris very, very easily. It's no difficulty at all. And the third thing is we have to think as a punter. And the punter gets an absolute shock when they look at their electricity bill. The quicker you can bring that down, the better. The more coal we can put into the system, the better. We have coal-fired power stations. They are discriminated against because they're black, and we shouldn't have that sort of discrimination, as we're told. And so we are actually destroying systems which can provide us with cheap 24/7 power and making it very expensive. It can be done. Oh, a boy at the back, the cheeky one.
Sir, we saw Albo being heckled by about windmills. Now, Donald Trump has said, that's it, no more windmills. They kill whales, they're inefficient. If you believe in the carbon nonsense, they create as much as they supposedly save. Albo is being heckled. You're right that Labor is so vulnerable because there's so many traditional Labor blue-collar supporters who don't buy this stuff. So, again, why is it that windmills, for example, and Bowen's entire kind of solar panels, explain why this can never work?
Well, Bowen is supporting China with solar panels and windmills, and they're being supported at our expense. It won't work because the sun doesn't shine all the time. That's pretty obvious. That we have wind droughts, so we can't provide electricity 24/7. The second thing is that the actual grunt that you get from wind and solar is not that you get from coal and nuclear and gas. So if you want power for an industrial economy, sea breezes and sunbeams don't do it. They don't have enough energy. Now, Mr Bowen is a very interesting character because he's the best thing the Liberals have got and he should stay there following this ridiculous ideology with people in marginal seats looking at their electricity bill saying, I'm going to vote on my electricity bill. And that can be capitalised on by the opposition. And it's a vote winner.
On that electricity, on that, that grunt you talk about the electricity, it seems to be also just bizarre that at the same time they're doing all of this net zero stuff, which is going to reduce our electricity ability to produce power, they're forcing us all, or trying to force people into EVs, many of which, again, come from China. And I was just reading earlier, there's a whole new range of Chinese EVs that are come flooding the market here because of the way they wrote the laws so that you couldn't have hybrids get the tax benefit, but only the EVs. This seems like we are trying to make everything more electric while we're making our electricity less reliable. It seems suicidal to me.
Well, I did notice outside the studio your black two-door V8 Mustang.
Yes.
So obviously you have
a devotee of these.
You have an interest.
Yes.
EVs are really not for a country like Australia, unless you do a couple of kilometres in the city, and that's it. So EVs are very expensive. They depreciate very quickly. We don't have a reliable power supply for them. If you dent underneath them, you basically have to throw the whole vehicle out. If you dent your Mustang, well, it'll probably fall apart, but they're just not economical. And most countries are trying to avoid having EVs, yet we're bringing in legislation to make it more expensive to have an internal combustion engine.
And all the car
yet they are
companies
more
moving
efficient.
away from it now.
And
They're
they're
saying,
cheaper.
well, we're gonna, yeah.
Rita.
Oh dear, this is well. You mentioned the $275 gift that we never got, the reduction in our energy bills. Never mind that. My bills, and I would imagine the bills of many of the people watching, have shot up by, well, in my case, well over $1,000. So forget about the 275. When are we going to have a reckoning about the actual increases we've seen, and what sort of an opportunity does that present for the coalition in a cost of living election that they keep telling us this is all about cost of living?
Well, it's a wonderful argument they can use. Where's my $275? You were promised this $275. What has happened? Your electricity bill's gone up. These people are destroying your jobs, they're destroying your income, they're destroying your family, they're destroying this country. They should be taking the line of attacking very savagely that renewables don't work. Every time we put in more renewables, the cost of electricity goes up. It doesn't become more reliable because if you have no sun, doesn't matter how much you've got there, you're not going to get more power. If you've got no wind, doesn't matter how much you've got there, you won't get more power.
We should stop calling it renewable and start calling it intermittent power.
Well, it is renewable. It is renewable because the great thing about renewables is the subsidies just keep coming, so
Yes,
they are renewable.
But okay, tell us about investment, because you worked for many years in the mining industry around the world. You know how mining investments and big business manufacturing investment, what they're looking for. Can you please explain the absolute carnage that net zero is doing to international investors? Now they can look at Trump, they can go to America, they can go to China, India, all around the world without being burdened by these prices.
Well, investment is very fickle. It moves very quickly. We had a couple of years ago, the Japanese ambassador commented that this is becoming a very expensive country, an uncertain country to invest in. And the Japanese have been very big investors in this country, and he was right. Japanese money has gone elsewhere. We do not invest in our own country, despite the fact we've got trillions in super. We do not invest
give it to the Labor Party to run their super funds. Why wouldn't you?
We have major projects that need money, that create jobs, create taxation. We don't invest in our own country. We have American money, Japanese money, Korean money, money from the UK, and that is going elsewhere. And in my field, if I have a geological idea and then do all the drilling and put everything into practice and go through all the economic evaluations, from that idea until we start to earn money, it's 25 years. So you cannot change the investment rules overnight, which is what Labor is doing, because it'll be our children and grandchildren who suffer from that. And they don't care. They're only interested in the 3-year term. And this is why you cannot vote for someone that is not a leader and doesn't have vision. And this is where our Liberal Party really have to lead and have a vision for the nation, not for getting re-elected.
Step up, Libs. Ian Plimer, Professor Plimer, always great to chat to you here in the classroom, here in Professor Plimer's classroom on Outsiders. Fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.